Good morning. I don't have any prepared speech here, so I'm truly a Q&A guy. If anybody has any questions for me, I'd appreciate it.
I'll start.
Could you pass her the mic?
I'm sorry, they just said use the mic.
We're all waking up. Don't worry about it.
Is it on now?
Yep.
Yes. Oh, I hear myself. I just thought maybe you could start by talking about effectively using social media, since you do that so well.
Yeah.
That our candidates here would probably like to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, it depends on the platform, obviously. I'm kind of a Twitter specialist exclusively. Believe it or not, the algorithms change relatively regularly. So what I would recommend to any candidates out there, the thing that Twitter is being most kind towards are threads right now, which is when you put a series of 7, 8, 10, 20 tweets consecutively and you launch them all at once. They're wanting longer form discussions. And obviously you can't do that in a single tweet. So if you're willing to put in the work and if you can put together something interesting, that I have found gets tremendous traction. I had a thread where I put together, all I did was scour the existing Twitter sphere, and all I searched was food shortages, riots, and then I searched something else with riots, and I found all of the videos globally of all of the riots and basically revolutions that we're witnessing across the globe that aren't being reported by the media, but are being reported on the ground by people. I put them together in a thread giving details, and then I did the research to figure out why each individual country was having the issues it was. It happened to fall into the ESG category, which I spoke about yesterday, as to why the food shortages and inflation were really occurring very rapidly. So I put that together. That thread alone, which was only launched 4 days ago, has over 250,000 impressions. So that's the type of stuff that you can do, and I did that in an hour and a half, you know? Obviously, it helps that I have almost 50,000 followers, so it can get traction, and it'll be harder if you're starting from scratch. But I started from scratch about 2 years ago, and I'm up to almost 50,000 followers. So dedication is the other big aspect. You can't just expect to hop on there and be like, I have good tweets, I'm gonna take off. Like, you really gotta be committed to this thing. So that's the downside, but I hope that helps a little bit.
So I have two questions which are not really related, but sort of along the lines of Twitter. With the long threads, how do you, when you're constructing them, because you have to have a way to make people want to read the next tweet, right? Like,
Right.
So how do you think about getting your hook to the next one so people continue reading the thread? Or maybe do you think the first tweet's the most important? And then totally related, I just was seeing the things you had posted on the California truckers. I wonder if you just could comment on what's going on there with the independent trucking.
Yeah, that's tragic. As far as the lead-in, I think it's just important that the original tweet in the thread is compelling. It has to have something that's novel, that strikes a chord with your audience. It obviously depends on the subject, so I can't really give you like a broad-based answer, but there has to be a hook, and then you just put thread 1 of X at the end of it so people know it's a thread so that they don't just scroll through, because you want them to click it and read the rest. That's really all there is to it. As for California and the trucking issue, AB 5 was, Assembly Bill 5 was a bill in California that was supposed to make it, you know, best intentions thing all the time, right? But hell was paved with those. So they were trying to make it so that companies like Uber and Lyft would not be using independent contractors. They wanted to make sure that the drivers were getting health insurance and paid time off and blah, blah, blah. So they wanted everyone to be an employee. Well, that sounds good from the employer side, from the employee side. But in reality, there's over 70,000 truckers, and I'm not talking Uber and Lyft, I'm talking real, long-haul truckers that are independent contractors in California, and they will essentially be made illegal in the next few weeks. So big problem, especially when you're already dealing with the supply chain breakdown, especially when, if you guys recall, there was terrible issues with the ports, where they weren't able to get the vast majority. Why is this opening on me? Where they weren't able to get the vast majority of goods off the ships in time. So that kind of began everything, if you recall. And now we're once again criminalizing production, essentially. It's just insane. So I pray that that Newsom or whoever is actually running the ship over there gets in line, because it's going to be.
You say these things without any irony in your voice, given what the history of the California legislature. How can you just be so understanding?
Yes, well, because I was born and raised in California, so there's just yeah. I mean, that's the reason I'm understanding, is because unfortunately the voting populace in California is so, yeah, they're so indoctrinated to this stuff that, like, you can have a politician who comes from that environment that is a true believer in all of this nonsense, and they get up there and they run on it and they win, and the terrible system perpetuates itself. But we're going to suffer. That's that's why I'm concerned. Californians, I left because I realized that it was going to be untenable for myself or anybody that values freedom. But this isn't just about California. If the vast majority of the goods, especially for the West Coast, come into ports, Long Beach, Oakland, San Francisco, if they can't drive them into the other states, which they won't be able to unless they're full-time employees, that's a big problem. Yeah, well, that's not exactly efficient, but yeah, I mean, those are the types of solutions that they'll probably come up with, and they're not really solutions, they're Band-Aids. Yeah. No, me too. I mean, this is why there's this constant debate about whether or not this is a controlled demolition of the economy, because if you see if you see one of them, you can kind of write it off. If you see 50 of them over a 2-year period, you start to go, maybe. Maybe this is actually intentional. And I don't really have a firm stance on that. It's a tough one to measure. If you want to grab the mic, I think you have the most questions in here, so.
You know what, what's that? I don't have a lot of questions, and I don't want to sit here and
You could just yell stuff at me, that's fine.
California sucks.
You're right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. These are self-evident things to talk about. But when we talk about this,
Here, will you hit the mic?
the things that have happened in the last 2 years, the things that some of us have just been oblivious to.
Right.
When you talk about the controlled demolition of the economy, you speak in a language that is very clear and technical almost. You're speaking not in an hysteria. There's no hysterical,
No hysterics.
no hysteria anyway.
Yeah.
And this is something that you came onto just a few years ago. Because the things you talk about last night, or during your presentation, I think most people in this room, if they had had some kind of a sense that it might be possible, simply couldn't believe it. You have to be rude to be able to believe these things. When I say that, I mean you have to be willing to read things outside of mainstream.
Yeah,
To accept that what's
for sure.
told is not true. And we libertarians can do that.
Yeah,
Most others, it doesn't occur to them.
exactly. Well, that's exactly why I made the point halfway through my speech last night, is that the reason I'm starting my speaking tour with libertarians is because I strongly believe the people in this room are the only ones that can really grasp this stuff early on. Fortunately, it is being popularized to an extent, because a lot of people just aren't going to believe this stuff unless it's told to them by the mainstream news. And fortunately, there's a handful of guys that have platforms or have avenues to platforms that will, legitimize their argumentation. But it's a huge uphill battle to get people to believe this stuff, because it does come across a little Alex Jonesy.
Yeah. But not.
But no, it's not. It's not Alex Jonesy. Like I've read the source documents, as Alex Jones would say. I have actually read the source documents to figure out if what is legitimate, what is fear mongering. I'm not really interested in fear mongering people on it, but it is scary. So it comes across a little bit fear mongery. But I also want people to be engaged. I want them to understand what's happening and why the people that are actually involved with it, exactly why they claim to be doing it, and what the knock-on effects will be from an Austrian economics, vantage point. which obviously the vast majority of Americans don't understand that either. So it's uphill battle on all fronts. I think the mic might be off.
Is it good now? Okay.
Oh, there you go.
I just want to point out that the rest of the tables here should be ashamed that all the questions have come from us. Come on, wake up, guys.
It's early, man.
So you mentioned yesterday, just kind of in passing, that you're second generation libertarian. Pretty unusual for someone, you know,
Yeah.
I'll say our age, maybe your age.
Right.
How do you think that changes your approach to talk to other people about libertarian politics versus someone who came from the right or came from the left originally?
That's interesting. I think because I was raised into it, I've never had a lot of people around me that agreed with me politically. So I have a very open mind. I'm very understanding of all the other political vantage points because that's all I've ever encountered. You know, up until I started my podcast and I discovered these tens of thousands of people that actually are libertarians, I was basically constantly speaking to people that don't agree with me. So I think from that end, it prepared me well for being able to get our message across to people that don't agree. Because that's all I ever did. And I had so many years of experience, even though I'm not that old, I'm 39. I was always able to basically package up our ideology in a way that was palatable to people left or right. And I've always found that I agree with, I can find something of sincere, deep held agreement with anybody of any political stripe, even communists, you know, like I can talk to anybody. And also my experience with my family and my friends, because I've been able to use the libertarian worldview and the principles of liberty and seeking that in my own personal life, I strongly believe that's why I've indoctrinated and converted so many of them, because they've seen me actually use delayed gratification and time value of money and compounding interest, you know, some real Austrian principles to be able to retire in my 30s. That's powerful, you know. At some point, the talk is kind of put to the side, and any of their disagreements with me principally are set to the side because they go, well, this is actually working. It's actually working for him. That's hard to argue with. So I think that that's a big advantage. I'm sorry, I even forgot the original question. Okay. I went to San Diego State and then Cal State San Marcos. Professors? I forget their names, to be honest, so I guess they weren't that good of mentors, but there was a few CEOs. I remember there was a CEO, I think he worked for Pepsi in the 90s, and one of my lecture halls, there was like 120 kids in there, but he was very good. I was in business school, so I didn't get much of the leftist indoctrination, plus I graduated in '08, which was good, because that was kind of before the woke takeover occurred in earnest, so that was nice. But yeah, I had a good experience. I honestly, because my dad was a businessman, I probably didn't need to go to business school. I was just young and I didn't know what I was doing, so it was more about like biding time, which is how college is for most people.
Your shirt says Liberty Lockdown. That's from your podcast then?
It is, yeah.
So is that launched as part of the COVID lockdown, or is it independent?
Well, it wasn't launched in tandem with the COVID lockdowns, if that's what you're asking. It was launched in direct opposition to it. May of 2020.
Right, okay, so it is something. Okay. So, and you have good traction in that specific niche market, I guess?
Yeah, it's been great. I do about 2 episodes per week, and I did 100,000 downloads last month. So you can do the math on that. It's a little over 12,000 people that are listening to every episode. So that's, considering I only started it, approximately 2 years ago, from podcast standards, especially libertarian podcast standards, that's pretty impressive. Peter Schiff, his producer, reached out to me, and he said, like, he wanted to help me. And I sent him my numbers, and he said that he had never seen a podcast grow this fast. And he's like, I'm not even talking like libertarian. He's like, I've never seen, you know, unless you're a famous person that's starting a podcast and people already know about you, obviously that grows faster. But he's like, never seen anything like it. So when this guy's worked with Tom Woods and Peter Schiff and all these other legends in the libertarian podcast game, that was mind-blowing to me, you know, because I didn't really have any perception as to how well I was doing. I knew I was getting some traction, but I didn't know if it was actually overachieving or under, you know, I didn't know. So yeah, it's been great.
Tell us about the format.
Sure. I mean, because of my finance background, I'll usually do a solo episode about once a month where I kind of break down my analysis of the economy on a macro scale and micro. I think that people, you know, the investor types tune in for that. And then there's also, I do interviews. I've had on Zuby and Maj Touré and Dave Smith and, God, so many great interviews. A bunch of Bitcoin specialists. Dave Rubin, who's kind of the more mainstream type. I mean, basically, that's probably how I've grown best, though, is because I have networked so successfully. I have a ton of huge guests that have, you know, outsized reach that are able to, I capitalize on those relationships by launching the episode. I always run a promo of like a minute of the best rip, like best rant from whoever my guest is, and I tag them in it in hopes that they'll retweet it. I don't ever demand it, obviously, but usually they do. And then I'm able to be exposed to their audience in a way that might drag in, you know, 0.5% of their audience or something like that. So that's really the key to it. And the interviews are kind of Joe Rogan style, freewheeling, not anything really scripted. I just feel like that's what people are most interested in, is authentic conversations. It's obviously uncensored, so it's been very hard for me to not be profanity laced this weekend, but
Yeah, me too.
We won't be offended.
good.
Since you're speaking at a candidate function and you're a podcaster and you're talking about your podcast a little bit, I assume you also interview candidates?
Pretty rarely, to be honest. I lose audience when I interview candidates that aren't well known, and I wish it weren't the way. But my experience, and I think this is actually good advice for you guys, if you want to be interviewed by larger podcasts, and even larger than mine, it's vitally important that you don't come across like a candidate. Do not go in there pitching. Do not go in there trying to make your message as political sounding as possible. Like, the reason that podcasts are successful is because they stand apart from mainstream media. And the main way they stand apart is in authenticity and truth-telling. And if you're not prepared to do that, you're not going to get invited back, and you're probably not going to do much in terms of actually getting people's attention, because they're going to be struck by the stark difference between myself, the host, who's being profane and freewheeling, and then you're going to be this sculpted, packaged thing. Doesn't land. So I hope that helps advice-wise, because I have had a few on, and every time they come across like they're trying to, like they're on CNN or something, and
Yeah, like
Just-
Elizabeth Warren drinking a beer on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah.
So Trump made some profanity acceptable for candidates, like
Yeah.
calling bullshit and everything else.
right,
I curse like a sailor, probably because I'm a Marine.
right.
But right, and you are a sailor, Mary. And but I wonder if, you know, if the general public is, and even if it's acceptable for someone who's trying to lead with the F word, for example. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's something that, like, and I'm not even a fan of Trump or Biden, for example, but Trump made a comment and said it was locker room talk, and he was right. So
It was locker room talk.
yeah, and we talk like that.
Yeah.
Right. So, and when we're away from the mic, I'm going to drop the F-bomb left and right, because that's what I do.
Yeah.
But when you're in front of people, that's not necessarily the way to lead.
Oh, yeah,
So-
no, I mean, it goes both ways though, because like this is the debate that we were having with Justin Amash at the dinner last night. It's like, are you trying to wake people up or are you trying to win? And from a libertarian, political position, oftentimes it's going to be a little bit of both because we're probably not going to win. So I'm of the camp that throwing caution to the wind, being your authentic self, is the better avenue to take. That's my belief.
Right.
Justin makes very compelling arguments for why I'm wrong,
Yeah.
and I respect that. I have to respect it. His career and his experience would make me a fool not to listen to what he has to say. So I'm still mulling that over. But I think that even if you were to go on a podcast and you don't have to be profane, but you just need to be real. Like that's the most important thing. Oftentimes it comes across very scripted. And that's the thing that I hate the most. It just comes across like it's like, look, you're talking to thousands of other libertarians right now. And it sounds as if you're trying to convince your average Fox or CNN viewer to vote for you. And that just doesn't work. Like you have to be functioning for the audience. And if you know what the audience is, well, then just make sure that you're delivering to those type of people.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And also, if you get a chance to talk a little bit more about, I guess, the real estate market and any connection to, COVID and violations of law that you might want to comment on, that'd be interesting.
Sure. Well, that was the primary reason actually that I shut down my business was because they were doing eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, which, as far as I'm concerned, was the abolition of property rights in this country. And I understand the logic, I understand the reasoning, it was all justified, I guess. But as a mortgage lender, someone whose entire career and the security of all of my investments is dependent on the capacity to foreclose on property, that's an untenable position to put me in, isn't it? When I have hundreds of millions of dollars that are deployed in the real estate market and you're telling me, well, people don't have to pay you. Okay, well then I'm gonna stop doing that. And I mean, it's catastrophic. The knock-on effects from that are absolutely awful. And as for the real estate market, we're in an increasing interest rate world now. And if the Fed is committed to breaking the back of inflation, which will require a continuation of this process, I would expect the inventory to start to hit the market because we're dealing with something I've never dealt with in my lifetime, which is a recession with inflation. I mean, all the recessions in my lifetime have always been deflationary in nature, where we have terrible deflation that ripples through the economy, cascading defaults, things like that. This is unique because you have simultaneous horrific economic situation plus inflation, which makes it even more horrific. So I think what you'll see is people that can't afford to live because of the inflation will start to sell their homes because it's the one main asset that has equity. And that's concerning. Now, the only reason that real estate hasn't been rocked already is because the inventory levels are so low. And they've been extraordinarily low because of the lockdowns and the supply chain shortages, which made material costs, the input costs to construct new inventory skyrocket. It's very complicated. I mean, as you can tell, there's many, many factors that go into this. I'm currently building 6 houses myself, and that'll be the last investment I ever do in real estate, or not ever, but until we get to sound money or some, sane basis for reality. So yeah, we're in very, very tumultuous times economically, like nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I don't think we've truly felt the repercussions of the lockdowns yet.
Hi, I haven't heard your podcast before, but I'm wondering.
No problem.
Do you direct people to join their local parties or their local affiliates on, because it sounds like you have a lot of people that are interested, your numbers are going up. Is there times that you encourage people to join their local affiliates?
I mean, not often, because I don't feel like I'm evangelizing. I'm not trying to put people into a political mindset, but I do I'll run sponsorships from Young Americans for Liberty for, just those that are interested in getting people, like young people that are motivated, that are listening,
And
involved.
you can direct them to the lp.org or,
Right. And Angela McCardle reached out to me just last week asking me if I wanted to have an affiliate link. So I probably would start doing that more often if I had one. But yeah, I think everybody understands that, like, the reason I got involved was because I discovered Dave Smith on Joe Rogan 7 years ago, the first time he was on, and I had been a huge Joe Rogan fan. And I heard a guy who was speaking words that I had said 1,000 times. And I was just like, oh my God.
so that's
Incredible.
interesting too. So that's kind of my avenue on how I came to be here was actually, I'm not Mises, but I'm Mises friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And I do listen to Dave Smith and Tom Woods and
Well, I've been on there, so you've probably heard me.
So, Dave specifically said, go join your local affiliate right now.
Right.
Be involved, get in the party, do these things. So I listened, and that's why I'm here. So it'd be nice, since
Yeah.
you're here talking to us, and, we're not going to go on your show and get an interview, but you can say, join your local affiliates. It's very
Yeah.
vague. Everybody knows what state they live in. They can go to their websites. It'd be nice to have that type of push too, because we're trying to grow.
Of course.
And, Justin Amash said, leave the activism to the activists
Right.
last
Well-
night. So we're the political side, the candidate side. So let us do that, but the activists can ship people over to us.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is a symbiotic relationship there. Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I think Dave was pushing you guys to get involved because he was looking at running potentially. So I'm not really interested in politics in that way. I am more of the activist side. I am more of the fire people up and wake people up side. So it goes both ways. But yes, I agree.
So I'm going to circle back to podcasts for just a minute. I mean, we're kind of still on that, but so for our candidates here, what would you say would be a good way for them to attract someone who has a podcast to invite them to come on and speak?
It's tough, man. I mean, here's the truth. And podcasters want people that will bring in ears. And if you're not known, you won't. So I don't know how you get over that hurdle other than to become better known. And how do you become better known without having, it's chicken and the egg, right? So, but I dealt with the same issue when I started my show 2 years ago, and I found ways to get better known. I debated a neocon, which I had some really good rants, and I posted a clip of it, and then Dave Smith, of all people, commented, and he said, "Man, you crushed that. I'd love to watch the whole thing. Do you have a link?" And I was like, "Oh my God, my icon wants to watch me debate a neocon. This is incredible." And then I was on his show a couple months later. So, I mean, it requires some creativity and some luck, to be honest. Like, you just have to be grinding. And as far as like getting attention, I think if you're really, the best way would be to work your way up. There's a lot smaller podcasts that are out there that will be glad to have you on. And it's kind of like I don't know, like a minor league baseball thing. You got to work your way up to the big leagues. And I'm not the big leagues, don't get me wrong. Joe Rogan's the big leagues. But that's kind of how I would go about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? There we go.
I'm an old guy, and I don't listen to podcasts.
Totally fine.
I know it's not. Well, it is, but
No, it's fine. Trust me, it's okay.
here's the thing. Why? Because a podcast seems to be filled with. How can you get it? How can you go to a podcast and filter out? I don't care about the swearing. I want content. I want information. I want more than just bullshit opinions. And a lot of that comes from these things. But it's really hard to listen for an hour to something when you really only want to listen to it. It's like a I don't know, a History Channel show where they give you 5 minutes of content in the beginning and then they bullshit with you the next hour to keep you on.
Yeah, that's true.
That is what happens. I mean, it's.
Well, some shows, I mean.
How do you
like-
work with that? Because you can't just wander in inanity all the time or whatever. You have
No,
to
of
stay
course.
some kind of focus.
Yeah, I mean, I go into every episode with an idea of, it's usually current events, but it's whatever, but it's current events that aren't being discussed by the mainstream, So I'm trying to deliver value always.
And it's a guided discussion, right?
Yeah, well, I am the
Pretty much.
guide.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the
Yeah.
host, so.
Right, you guide, exactly.
I will either
You
guide
ask
the
the
guest
questions.
or I will guide, the topics, if I'm doing a solo episode. The solo episodes are probably what you would enjoy more because they're more succinct.
Right.
It's
Good.
going to be like boom, 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 boom. But there's great podcasts out there that are shorter form, but they're going to come across more scripted because they kind of have to be.
Yeah, to get to their point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But Tom, you can tell,
Tom is
he
20.
goes in with a very specific subject matter, and, whereas for some people, they prefer the freewheeling. They want to hear
Right.
people think these ideas through. If you're the businessman type that just wants the boom, boom, here's the facts, ma'am, there's other podcast options out there. The shorter form ones would probably be up your alley.
They can't all be based on a conclusion. I mean, you have to have the conversation. People have to work through the process, like you say, because a lot of times on a podcast, I don't need to have somebody tell me something they think if I already agree with it.
Right.
I'm more inclined to want to be convinced of something that I wasn't aware of.
Exactly, which is exactly why I think long-form podcasts for
Right.
libertarians is vitally important.
Right.
Because if you have anyone that's listening that's not a libertarian, you can't just say, taxation is theft and be
Yeah.
done with it. Like you have to work your way through these topics so that they can see your reasoning, because they've never heard most of us talk at length. So I think that's the reason that the long-form interview, the Joe Rogan style, I don't ever do 3 hours like Rogan does twice a week, but
3 hours?
that's how long Joe Rogan's podcast is.
I
Yeah.
don't-
At least.
That's-
Sometimes
yeah.
4 and 5 hours.
And that's the idea behind which I'm not interested in podcasts, because it's trying to grab my time for too long, and I don't.
Right.
get it.
Well, but he's the biggest podcast on earth.
In the
He
world,
does,
yeah.
He does over 10 million downloads per episode.
$10 million an episode.
I swear to God, he's bigger than any nightly anything ever.
$15 million.
Yeah.
Right on. But it costs him a lot to do that, right? No.
No, it costs him nothing.
Nothing.
And he makes
Nothing. $10 million.
7 figures a year.
Yeah, right.
Or 8.
more.
Or 9.
Or 9, exactly. And this has become an income, has this become more than a negligible income stream for you, given that you're an investor?
I mean, I'm very early on, but I do run 3 ads per show. I make like $600 an episode, so
Okay.
it's not nothing.
Right.
But as I've said, I'm not in this for money. The primary reason that I do it is because I want to try and see more liberty in the world. I really do. And the income that I derive from this, the only reason I run ads is because I want to not be coming out of pocket to travel the world to talk about this stuff too. So I'm trying to.
It's a business model you made.
Yeah, I'm trying, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to like not lose money by doing this stuff. Because if I'm going to commit my entire life to it, I think it's a little unfair to me to be like, and I'm also going to eat my savings to do this. you know?
Yeah. And die a pauper.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I have done this all bootstrap. I have not gone about this in any way that any other podcaster I've talked to has done. I completely grew my podcast through Twitter exclusively, no marketing elsewhere. And once I got a big enough following, I literally posted my download figures on my Twitter account, and I said, hey, who wants to sponsor me? And then I got a bunch of people that DM me saying, hey, I would like to run an ad. How much? What's that? Well, no, that wasn't so luck at that point, because I had built such a big following that they were able to see exactly the download numbers. And there's rates that are kind of market standards. It's usually $25 per 1,000 listeners is kind of like the idea. So I just put it out there, and then I had some smaller people that couldn't afford to advertise on Tom Woods or Dave Smith, but they knew that they wanted to reach some of that audience, so they reached out to me. And then they run, a 4 or 5 ad package, and I just kind of use the smaller folks, and then I built myself up to being one of the mid-tier podcasts, and now I have, more conventional type sponsors too. So I don't know. It's just, I've been learning as I go. What's that? Twice. Twice, sometimes 3. Yeah, basically every other day. Well, no, the subscription makes it so that once someone has subscribed, they're pretty much, yeah, there you go. So you're pretty much locked in. So every new episode I do, it'll automatically hit your phone, assuming you have it set up to auto update. So after that, like every time I launch an episode, I get like 3,000 downloads right away. because that's the subscribers. And then another couple thousand or another 3,000 trickle in over the next week. And then my YouTube, I put a video version up on YouTube, and that'll usually do about 1,000 viewers per episode. So combining them all, you get up to 10,000 or so. On YouTube, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine too. Well, you're starting from scratch, brother. And that's okay. Well, Tom Woods is famous for his email newsletter. I mean, yeah.
Either never learned about or unlearned and forgot about, and just need to be reminded that we need to go out and get more intellectual ammunition and more factual ammunition.
Right.
What's going on around the world that is occurring.
Yeah.
When I say I don't do those things, I'm not patting myself on the back.
Yeah, no, it's, well, I'll tell you, if you want a podcast that's long form, but the first hour of it is just incredible, No Agenda. No Agenda is amazing. They take audio clips of the media narrative from the past week, and then they give you basically the truth behind what's happening, or at least their opinion of the truth. It's fascinating. It's been one of my favorites. Hello.
Morning. Clearly, there's an age divide on who's on Twitter and who's listening to podcasts.
A little bit. I know
Yeah.
some grandmas on there, so.
Yep. But it's still the majority of people are on the younger side of the scale.
Yeah.
They're on Twitter.
For sure.
And I'm wondering at this point, now Twitter's been around for a while, are we seeing any data yet as far as how is that generating its votes? Because there's a history, there's a mindset that young people don't show up at the polls and actually vote. A lot of talk, a lot of activism, but the numbers don't show that young people actually turn out in huge numbers and vote. And I'm wondering, on the Twitter podcast side, are those people turning out in bigger numbers?
Good question, man. I don't have any data on that, but I would imagine that the people that listen to me are pretty politically motivated, just simply because that's my worldview. That's like everything I'm talking about is like trying to save us. So I would think that they probably vote, and I think they probably vote heavily libertarian, if I had to guess.
So in general, if the more involved they seem to be on Twitter and listening to podcasts, the more likely, in your mind,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they're turning out at the polls.
I mean, it goes both ways because there is some niche area of libertarian Twitter that is very black-pilled and very collapsitarian that believe that, voting is violence and you're basically giving authority to your masters and all that stuff. I don't fall into that camp, obviously, since I'm here. I think that's kind of nihilistic, and I think that, even if you believe that voting ultimately doesn't accomplish your task, I don't understand why you wouldn't vote for someone that you believe in. And if you don't believe in anybody, then you probably need to get a therapist more than anything, because there are some good people that are involved in this, and I think that there's just, people are so black-pilled. It bums me out. But yes, to answer your question, the vast majority of people on Twitter are way more, they are politicos, like they are pundits almost.
I go back to when Ron Paul was first running and the internet polls. If I believed all of the internet polls, Ron Paul would now be looking to run in his fifth term.
Right. Yeah, we crush it on the internet, man.
Yes, indeed. But
Unfortunately, they don't really, it's both. There's some concocted nature of those internet polls because there was such a strong youth movement behind the Ron Paul revolution. This is why I got involved with the Mises Caucus in the first place, is because I am one of those kids, and I want to see it live on. I think that his legacy is a beautiful one, and I strongly believe that it deserves to have a home within the party with its namesake, which is the Libertarian Party. So I'm thrilled to see so many of the young people, even though it has created tremendous discord amongst kind of the older guard of the Libertarian Party and the younger guard. I don't see the reason for antagonism personally. Like, we are, in my opinion, as libertarian as anybody, and it breaks my heart to see so many people at each other's throats. It's like, I don't know if I have anything more to say about that other than to say I hope that we can work our way through this period.
well, thanks. So I rarely vote for a winner, but I don't think I've ever voted for a loser.
There you go. I love it.
All right, well, I think I will kind of wrap us up here with
Sure.
a final question. So like we had said, today is our, for very much for candidate support.
Yeah.
So do you have any words for our candidates? What should they, I guess we kind of talked a little bit right at the opening here. What are people looking for in our candidates? What is a way that they can kind of attract people to talk with and to kind of share the message of liberty with?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Are you saying in terms of media or just the people themselves?
People themselves. Media too, but people themselves in
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that Justin Amash nailed it last night. Start with common ground. Don't start with antagonism. In my experience, I genuinely believe that the vast majority of people do, contrary to their voting record, value liberty in some fashion. and if you can find that within them, then you can work from there to establish why they might want to consider a different path when it comes to who they're voting for and the political lane that they're in.
3 questions. Do you take your show?
You wait till the very end, you hit me with 3. Come on, man.
Do you take your show to college campuses? Number 1.
I haven't yet, but that's a great idea.
Okay. Do you take your show to places that's maybe controversial, like maybe let's say the U.S. Supreme Court and their rulings the past couple of weeks or so?
You mean in terms of topics? I don't go to the Supreme Court to record, but yes, I absolutely, I cover all of the most outrageous stuff.
Okay, how about on site,
No, I've never done that. I literally record from home. I live in Miami in a condo. If you watch my show on YouTube, you'll see I have boats and stuff going by in the background. So I do it all on site, but my guests are just via Zoom or via, Skype type technology. So they just
okay.
just teleport in.
So no remote show?
I haven't, but I will be because I have a bunch of big guests lined up. I'm scheduling with, we'll see if it happens, but it should be Kennedy of Fox News and Rand Paul and the guy from Project Veritas and big guests from my vantage point because I'm going to, what's it called, Freedom Fest in Las Vegas in 3 days. I'll be there. So
Okay, and
that's going to be the first time that I've recorded mobily.
Okay, and the 4th question.
Sure.
Because there are 3. Do you go to, let's say, a spontaneous site? Let's say all of a sudden there's a protest or march someplace. Do you plan on going to that particular site
Yeah.
all of a sudden?
Yeah. I'm actually very open to doing that. That requires a little bit bigger budget than what I've had involved in the show so far, but I am totally open to it. What I would actually like to do, because I kind of have made my name by interviewing people that are involved. Like I had the Canadian trucker convoy. I had some of the block leaders on my show. So I'm trying to give, if your liberty has been locked down, I want you to know that I'm the home for you. So that has been my focus. So I would love to go to the Netherlands right now and do on the ground reporting. I mean, that would be amazing. I never thought that this was going to get to be even as successful as it is so far. So I hadn't ever thought that big. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I really hadn't. I hadn't ever thought that I would have a budget where I might actually be able to fly to Europe to go cover some crazy protest, but you never know. A year from now, maybe I'll be doing that.
That's it? Oh, okay.
No, it's okay. It's
Okay,
okay.
speaking of the truckers' strike in Canada,
Yeah.
what surprised you the most, number 1? Number 2, did you offer a U.S. solution to the Canadians as far as that protest? What surprised you, and did you offer any ideas that they said, oh, that's pretty good?
Yeah, fighting tyranny, I think you have some American solutions. But I wasn't going to recommend that because my YouTube channel would get canceled. I think that the thing that surprised me most is how much more some people from other countries value freedom than we do. That concerns me because I had always considered America to be the home of the radical freedom lover. And it seems quite evident after the past couple of years that that's not the case. And while that's simultaneously upsetting, it's also a little uplifting. You know, it means that our ideals are shared by more people than just Americans. So I'm hopeful in that regard. I love to see, I think that I'll be honest, I teared up when because I interviewed the block leader while he was doing a live stream as he walked around, and just to see the thousands of people that were in the streets and you know, with children and signs on their truck saying, "Thank you, we love you, you know, you're fighting for us." Beautiful. One of the most beautiful moments I've ever done. So no, I didn't really have answers for them as to what they should do because I don't know their political system well enough to give that advice. But it was an amazing interview, and it was also heartbreaking though, because I knew I actually then felt as if I had a relationship with some of the people as they were getting suppressed by the police a few days later. So I get emotionally tied up in this stuff now because I'm actually talking to people that are putting their necks on the line. So it's a weird experience. I never would have thought I'd be here. Anyways, thank you guys so much for your time. If you guys are interested in checking out the show, you can just search Liberty Lockdown any platform. But most importantly, just keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are the ones that are actually doing the work, that are running in these thankless political positions, and it means the world to me. I mean, you guys are the true heroes, so thank you again.